cold, measured narrator's voice. Slow, deliberate pace. Every sound, every detail amplified. The scene is cinematic, tense, almost suffocating. The polish streaked across the glass conference table, leaving a faint gleam that caught the light from the towering windows. The faint aroma of freshly brewed, expensive coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the faint scent of lemon cleaner. Sunlight reflected off gold accents along the ceiling, glinting like sharp edges of privilege. This was Reeves Global Tech, a skyscraper that pierced the clouds, a monument to wealth, ambition, and cold calculation. And amid all this opulence, invisible as dust in the corner, moved Lucia Vega. Her gloves were thin, worn at the fingertips. She moved with practiced silence, polishing surfaces, adjusting chairs, emptying wastebaskets, all while her ears absorbed every word, every laugh, every subtle negotiation. She was a shadow, a ghost moving in a gilded cage. She was invisible to them all. Victor Reeves entered like a storm, all sharp angles and power. The contract in his hand seemed almost to vibrate with authority. He dropped it onto the table, the thud echoing across the polished marble floor. He laughed, not just a laugh but a declaration of dominion, a sound that seemed to bend the room to his will. Anyone who can translate this gets my salary for the day. His gaze swept across the executives, a predator savoring the hunt. $240,000. A ripple of laughter swept through the room. Smiles, whispered jokes, knuckles tapping watches. The kind of laughter that reminded everyone who truly controlled everything. Lucia kept her head down, her fingers still moving the cloth across the table's surface. But inside, her heartbeat thundered. Every muscle tensed, every nerve on edge. She understood each character on the document. Every stroke, every symbol, the technical precision of it. 72 hours. That was all. 72 hours to either save herself and her family or watch everything crumble. 1:30 to 2:10. Memories flashed like fragments of old film. Her father, a prosecutor, upright and principled, teaching her the subtle power of words. Her mother, a linguist, showing her that language could be more than communication. It could be a bridge, a weapon, a shield. The jade pen, a gift, a promise, a token of love and ambition, lay hidden in her pocket. It was heavier than its weight, loaded with years of heritage, lessons, and expectation. But now she was a cleaner. She swept floors that had been walked over by billionaires, polished the surfaces they touched without a second thought, carried trash bags they barely noticed. She carried debts, medical bills, eviction notices, a tally of life, $27,000 standing between dignity and despair, and the countdown was already ticking. Her life had condensed into routines of invisibility. Clean, observe, listen, endure. And yet, the fire of language, of intellect, of her secret heritage, burned beneath the surface. Each Mandarin character she had memorized as a child now whispered to her, beckoning with the promise of salvation. She had survived years of invisibility, but now the moment demanded visibility, demanded courage, demanded everything she had. Victor Reeves' voice cut through the haze, carrying a mocking lilt. Maybe even you could try. Do they teach Mandarin in housekeeping? The room erupted in laughter again, a symphony of cruelty from the privileged. Eyes flicked to her, amused, skeptical, indulgent. She kept her gaze down, letting the cloth glide over the table, hiding the tremor in her hands. Not yet. This was not her moment. Not yet. Night fell and the office emptied. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, echoing in the cavernous space. Security cameras rotated lazily above, but no one watched her now. She slipped into the room like a shadow reclaiming her territory. The jade pen emerged from her pocket. She held it close, feeling its cold, smooth weight, remembering her father's voice. Knowledge illuminates. Never let it leave your hands. Lucia seated herself at the massive table, her uniform a mask of invisibility, but inside, her mind raced. She spread the document before her, the characters crisp and sharp, each one a challenge, each one a key to freedom. For the first time in years, she wrote not to survive, not to endure, not to be invisible, but to fight. To claim, with each stroke of her pen, the life she had always deserved. The hours stretched before her like an infinite battlefield, and she was ready to conquer it. Night wrapped itself around the city like a dark velvet curtain, and the towering glass building of Reeves Global Tech stood glowing like a lighthouse in a storm. Inside, the office was a different world, quiet, sterile, almost sacred, the kind of silence that demanded greatness. Lucia Vega walked through those halls as if trespassing in a cathedral she never believed she would enter. Her reflection in the glass looked small, exhausted, almost transparent. But her eyes, those carried a fire no uniform could hide. She sat alone in the shadow of the boardroom table, the same one where executives laughed at her only hours earlier. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the contract, the jade pen resting like a blade beside her. Familiar, comforting, dangerous. The document was thick, filled with dense legal Mandarin, technical terminology, coded financial structures. Anyone else would have needed a team of lawyers and translators. Lucia had only herself, her memory, and a lifetime buried under dust and humiliation. She inhaled slowly and began. Each stroke of the pen was a reclaiming. A piece of herself she thought long dead, returning one heartbeat at a time. The ink flowed like blood across the page. Her mind translated effortlessly, characters, clauses, loopholes, implications. And suddenly she saw it. The contract was poison. A hidden acquisition meant to sell the company's core assets to a foreign investor. A takeover disguised as expansion. A clause that would strip Reeves Global Tech of ownership in exactly 72 hours. They had been laughing, and they never realized she understood every word. She froze. If she revealed this, the company would owe her everything. If she stayed silent, she would watch an empire collapse. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. Soft, tired, but strong. Use your gift, not to survive, to rise. Lucia looked at her reflection again. This time she didn't see a cleaner. She saw a strategist, a weapon, a woman with power no one expected. The next morning arrived like a battlefield horn. The elevators opened and the world that mocked her came alive. Executives in suits, heels striking marble, phones ringing with urgency and ego. Lucia walked through them invisible, yet burning from the inside. She carried the translated documents pressed to her chest. In the boardroom, the executives gathered again, sparkling with confidence, unaware that their empire stood on the edge of collapse. Victor Reeves entered last. Perfect suit, perfect posture, perfect arrogance. He didn't notice her at first. No one did. Then she stepped forward. Her voice cut the room clean in half. I translated your document. Silence fell like a dropped chandelier. Dozens of heads turned. Confusion, disbelief, amusement. Victor stared at her with a slow, poisonous smile. Oh, and tell me, what exactly did you think you were reading? Lucia didn't blink. I read how you're about to lose your company. Gasps rippled like wind through dry grass. Chairs shifted. Pens stopped moving. The room was no longer amused, it was afraid. Victor's expression cracked. Not much, but enough. A microsecond. A tremor. Then the mockery returned like armor. And what makes you think a janitor understands corporate law? Lucia placed the documents on the table with a calmness she didn't feel. Her voice was no louder than a whisper, but it carried like thunder. Because I was trained to read Mandarin law by 2 federal court translators. Because I grew up with legal texts instead of bedtime stories. Because I have spent more time inside contracts than you have spent inside this office. No one laughed this time. She placed the jade pen beside her translation like a signature of war. And because I just saved your empire, whether you respect me or not. She stepped back. Executives stared at Victor as though waiting for a verdict, waiting to see whether power would crush her or kneel before her. The room held its breath. The world held its breath. Lucia didn't move. She had been invisible all her life. Not today. Behind the fear in their eyes, she saw something else. Recognition. and the smallest beginning of respect. No numbering, just continuous dramatic narration, expanded deeply. The silence in the boardroom stretched like a wire pulled to breaking. A single heartbeat could have shattered it. Lucia stood still, not out of confidence, but because if she moved even an inch, she feared her legs might collapse beneath her. Victor Reeves slowly walked toward her, one measured step after another, like a man approaching a wild animal, cautious, curious, dangerous. His shadow passed over her as he stopped inches away, searching her face for weakness. He found none. He picked up the translated pages, her work, her sleepless night, her resurrection, and flipped through them with a speed that suggested he expected nonsense. But as his eyes scanned the text, the arrogance in his shoulders shifted, almost imperceptibly. He slowed. He read again. He sat down. Executives exchanged uncertain glances, the kind people share when the world tilts. Lucia felt every gaze like heat on her skin. An older woman, CFO, silver hair, steel eyes, leaned forward. "Is she right, Victor?" Victor didn't speak. He kept reading, page after page after page. The tension became a living thing, breathing, circling, drawing blood. Lucia could hear her own pulse hammering in her ears. Her palms were damp, her throat a desert. One mistake, even one, and they would laugh again, crush her again, force her to disappear forever. But then, Victor stopped. He closed the folder, and when he looked up, everything was different. There was no mockery, no superiority, no dismissal, only realization. "You caught something none of my lawyers did," he said quietly. He didn't sound angry. He sounded shaken. A man who suddenly found a hole in the hull of his perfect ship. Executives leaned forward, hungry for answers. Lucia held her breath. Victor tapped the final page with one single finger. Slow, heavy, deliberate. This clause, this would have transferred controlling shares to the foreign buyer. The room inhaled in one violent gasp. If she hadn't translated this, we would have signed away the company in 3 days. Power shifted in that instant, away from silk suits and gold watches, landing squarely into the hands of a woman they never considered worth a glance. And then came the backlash. A young executive, hair perfect, ego bigger than the building, stood up with a sharp laugh. "Come on, this makes no sense. She's a janitor, not a strategist. She probably got lucky, or she fabricated the translation for attention." The accusation hit like a slap. Lucia felt it, but she didn't bend. She had bent enough in her lifetime. She met his eyes with steady fire. "I have the original Mandarin file. I printed nothing. I copied nothing. You can cross-check every line." Whispers rose like smoke, suspicion, fear, disbelief. The young executive stepped closer, too close, leaning into her space. "You don't belong in this room." Lucia didn't flinch. "I belong wherever truth is needed." The words were calm, precise. Victor raised a hand, not loudly, but with authority impossible to ignore. The room froze on command. "Sit down, Robert," he said. The young man obeyed, stiff, stunned, humiliated. Victor looked at Lucia again, differently now, as though seeing her for the first time. "What do you want in exchange for this?" he asked. His question fell with the weight of a mountain. Lucia could have asked for money, position, recognition. The entire board was waiting, half terrified of what she might say, half hoping she'd reach beyond her station so they could destroy her again. But Lucia Vega had learned patience from hunger, and strategy from survival. She didn't rush. She looked down at her own hands, the cracks in her skin, the faded scars, the proof of years spent scrubbing floors unseen. Then she looked back up, meeting the CEO of an empire eye to eye. "I want a chance," she said. The room blinked. Not a salary, not a title, a chance. Victor tilted his head, intrigued. "A chance for what, Lucia?" She answered without hesitation. "To prove I am more than my uniform." The silence that followed was not mocking. It was consideration. Real, heavy consideration. Victor stood again, paced to the window overlooking the city. A kingdom of glass and ambition spread beneath him. He stood there long enough for doubt to creep through the room like cold water. Then he turned. "Next quarter," he said slowly, "we meet with investors in Beijing. We need someone who understands Mandarin and contract law." Executives stiffened. They knew where this was going. Some looked horrified, others quietly impressed. Victor's eyes locked on hers. "You will attend that meeting with me." A collective exhale rippled around the table. Disbelief, outrage, awe, panic. The room was no longer merely tense, it was detonating. A janitor at $1 billion negotiation. A woman everyone ignored, now placed at the center of the empire. Someone laughed, quietly, nervously, because the world suddenly made no sense. But to Lucia, it finally did. She didn't smile. Not yet. Victory wasn't given, only loaned. She bowed her head slightly, not in submission but acknowledgement. "I won't disappoint you." Victor watched her closely. "I hope not," he said, "because if you're wrong, the fall will be spectacular." Her voice remained steady. "I've been falling my whole life. I'm not afraid of heights anymore." And with those words, the maid left the boardroom not as a shadow, but as a beginning. A storm in motion. A story no one would be able to stop. Lucia returned to her small apartment, the city's night lights spilling through the thin curtains, illuminating the worn furniture and peeling paint like a spotlight on her reality. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic from her mother's hospital visit earlier, mingling with the lingering aroma of instant coffee she had spilled on her translation notes. She sank onto the threadbare couch, feeling the weight of every sleepless night, every stolen moment of study, every invisible step she had taken through Reeves Enterprises. Her mind raced, replaying every meeting, every whispered insult, every look that had dismissed her as nothing. And yet, for the first time in years, she felt a surge of possibility. The door to opportunity had cracked open, and she could see a sliver of light. But the light was thin, delicate, and fragile. One wrong move and it could vanish entirely. Her phone buzzed, a message from her mother. "Daughter, they want me to stay in the hospital another day. I don't want to be a burden." Lucia pressed her forehead into her hands, fighting back tears. Her mother had carried so much already. 3 jobs, a broken heart, endless worry, and now her illness demanded even more. But there was no time to mourn, no time to crumble. Every second counted. Every choice she made could mean the difference between survival and ruin. She spread the papers across the tiny kitchen table, the remnants of her ruined laptop and coffee-stained notes forming a chaotic map of her work. The contract with Huang Tech was more complicated than she had imagined. Technical specifications mingled with legal jargon, cultural nuances, and subtle corporate manipulations. The stakes were immense. Millions of dollars, hundreds of workers, her family's survival. Lucia's fingers trembled as she picked up her jade pen. Her father's gift, the symbol of knowledge, resilience, and the heritage she had been forced to hide. She traced the carved characters slowly, feeling the weight of generations on her wrist. Knowledge illuminates. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, and she would honor it. Hours passed. The city outside became a blur of lights and sirens, of life moving forward even as hers seemed suspended. She reconstructed the damaged sections from memory, cross-referencing technical manuals she had downloaded, retyping, translating, annotating. Every character mattered. Every nuance could make or break the deal. By dawn, her arms ached, her eyes stung, but the first draft of her completed translation lay before her. She read it aloud quietly, listening to the cadence of her own voice, ensuring that nothing was lost in meaning, that nothing was misrepresented. Her heart pounded with every correct term, every precise interpretation. Then came the next threat, an email from Reeves Enterprises Security. New surveillance protocols, mandatory reporting. Any unauthorized presence would be flagged immediately. She couldn't risk being caught at the office before the Beijing meeting. She couldn't risk her mother's eviction. She couldn't risk exposure. And yet, there was no alternative. The contract had to be perfect. If she failed, the company could collapse. If she succeeded, she might save countless lives. The decision pressed on her like iron. And then she made it. She would go. She would take the risk. Saturday night found her once again in the bowels of Reeves Enterprises, the janitorial uniform a disguise, the jade pen clenched tightly in her hand. She moved silently, shadows stretching across polished floors like allies in her mission. The conference room, abandoned for the weekend, seemed to breathe with her tension. Her notes were carefully organized, her corrections precise, her translations flawless. Hours melted into each other. She worked tirelessly, reconstructing, refining, perfecting. Every sentence, every clause, every technical specification was scrutinized under the weight of her father's teachings and her own relentless determination. And then, just as she completed the final section, the lights flickered. A shadow appeared at the doorway. Heart pounding, she froze. It was Derek Willis. He smirked, as if he had known all along, as if her efforts had been nothing more than entertainment for him. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" he said, stepping into the room. "I saw you on the cameras, trying to steal the credit again." Lucia straightened. Her voice was calm, unwavering. "I am not stealing. I am preserving the truth." Willis laughed softly, the sound hollow, dangerous. "Truth doesn't matter here, only who controls the narrative. And right now, that's me." She didn't flinch. "Then you will be held accountable for the consequences of your translation, because I will ensure every word is accurate, every clause understood, and every responsibility assigned correctly." He paused. Uncertainty flickered in his eyes. No one had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever dared. "You realize," he said slowly, "if anyone finds out you've been doing this, you could be fired, or worse." Lucia's fingers tightened around the pen. "I've already risked everything. There is no worse left for me." A tense silence followed. Then he turned and left, leaving the door slightly ajar, the faint echo of his footsteps fading into the weekend emptiness. Lucia exhaled, exhausted but resolute. She had survived confrontation, subterfuge, and sleepless nights. The contract was finished. Every detail meticulously translated. Every potential disaster prevented. She had done what no one expected, and yet, she still remained invisible in the eyes of the empire she had protected. But she was no longer afraid. The risk had awakened something inside her. A power she had always possessed but had hidden beneath layers of servitude, exhaustion, and fear. As dawn broke over the city, the light glinting off skyscrapers like shards of promise, Lucia packed her notes carefully. The next step was unavoidable. The meeting in Beijing, the confrontation with Victor Reeves, the proof of her worth, and she would meet it head-on. Because for the first time in her life, she knew one unshakable truth. Knowledge could not be ignored, courage could not be silenced, and a single person, even one who had spent years invisible, could change the course of an empire. The flight to Beijing was a blur of clouds, anxiety, and exhaustion. Lucia pressed her forehead to the airplane window, watching the sun rise over the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson. Every fiber of her body ached, but she carried with her the culmination of weeks of work, sleepless nights, and unrelenting determination. In her bag rested the printed translation, meticulously annotated, alongside her jade pen, a talisman of both memory and purpose. Her mind replayed every word of the Huang Tech contract. Every clause, every nuance, every potential pitfall had been retranslated, double-checked, triple-checked. Yet doubt gnawed at her. What if Reeves refused to acknowledge her work? What if Willis had preemptively twisted the narrative, claiming the translation as his own? What if the board rejected her corrections entirely? By the time she landed, the city's energy was palpable. Skyscrapers reaching into the clouds, neon signs flickering like 1,000 eyes watching her every step. She could feel the weight of the stakes pressing down. Her mother's eviction, her family's precarious survival, and the livelihoods of countless workers dependent on the integrity of this contract. At the towering glass building of Reeves Enterprises' Beijing office, security swept her bag and checked her credentials. She presented the visitor pass arranged through a last-minute corporate favor, careful not to draw attention. Every step in the lobby echoed like a drumbeat of fate. The conference room was imposing. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the sprawling city below, while a massive table dominated the center, surrounded by Reeves' executive team and the Huang Tech representatives. Reeves himself sat at the head, immaculately dressed, his expression unreadable. He flicked his gaze toward her as she entered, eyes narrowing, a mix of recognition and calculation. "Miss Vega," he said, his tone flat but sharp. "I understand you have the translation." "Yes," Lucia replied steadily, placing the thick stack of annotated documents on the table. "It is accurate, complete, and fully reflects the terms and obligations stipulated by Huang Tech. I've highlighted sections that were previously misrepresented and clarified areas where corporate interpretations could lead to violations or unintended consequences." A murmur spread through the room. Reeves' assistant glanced at him nervously, and even the normally composed executives exchanged subtle glances. Willis, seated across the table, stiffened noticeably. "Let's see it," Reeves commanded, gesturing for her to continue. Lucia opened the stack and began walking the group through the contract, page by page. She spoke clearly, confidently, in Mandarin with occasional English and technical terminology when necessary. Each correction, each clarification was deliberate, leaving no room for ambiguity. The Huang Tech representatives leaned forward, nodding in approval, murmuring to one another. Willis interjected sharply, trying to redirect the discussion. "Some of these points are minor technicalities, irrelevant to the overarching agreement." Lucia's gaze snapped toward him, unyielding. "Minor errors can have major consequences. Misinterpreted technical specifications could lead to production delays, safety hazards, and legal violations under international trade law. Accuracy is not optional in this case. It is mandatory." A tense silence fell. Reeves studied her, his sharp mind weighing options, assessing her competence. Finally, he spoke, his voice measured. "You're claiming to have translated and verified this entire document yourself?" "Yes," Lucia replied, her pulse steady, though every nerve screamed with anticipation. "I am the only one who has fully reviewed it. Every other version circulating contained errors that could cost this company millions and compromise the workforce." Huang Tech's lead negotiator, an older man with silver-streaked hair, leaned forward. "This is the level of professionalism we expected," he said, eyes briefly meeting Lucia's. "We will not proceed until the translation is fully accurate. Misinterpretations from the past could have jeopardized this partnership." Willis paled. He hadn't anticipated external validation of her work. Reeves leaned back, calculating, his expression softening just slightly. He knew that acknowledging her contribution publicly would shift the balance of power in the room, and potentially within his company. Lucia continued, walking them through the contentious sections, highlighting clauses that previously seemed favorable to Reeves Enterprises but were actually liabilities. She outlined workforce implications, technical specifications, and cultural nuances essential for proper compliance. Her voice never wavered. Her eyes never left the contract. By the time she finished, the room was quiet, the air thick with awe and tension. Reeves gazed met hers. "You've done exceptionally well," he said finally, his tone a mixture of grudging respect and astonishment. "And you've saved this company from catastrophic errors." Lucia inhaled, feeling the weight of weeks of anxiety lift just slightly, but she remained focused. "There's one final point," she said. "The contract includes conditional clauses for workforce reductions, but Huang Tech has provisions for retraining and redeployment. Misrepresenting these terms could harm workers unnecessarily. The final decision rests with you, but this must be transparent and enforceable." The room nodded in agreement. Reeves' fingers drummed lightly on the table. Willis sat silently, his face a mask of disbelief and frustration. Finally, Reeves extended his hand. "You've earned your compensation, Miss Vega," My daily salary as promised. Lucia accepted the check, her heart racing. Not for the money alone, but for the validation. The proof that her knowledge, her dedication, and her courage could not be ignored. She looked at the Huang Tech representatives and the board members, her gaze steady. For the first time, she felt truly seen. Not as a cleaner, not as an invisible worker, but as a skilled professional whose intellect and perseverance had altered the course of a corporate empire. The meeting adjourned, but Lucia stayed behind a moment, feeling the quiet thrill of victory. She had faced impossible odds, navigated betrayal, and preserved the truth. And in doing so, she had carved a place for herself, her family, and the countless workers who relied on the integrity of others to safeguard their livelihoods. Stepping out into the bustling streets of Beijing, the sun now high in the sky, she allowed herself a moment of relief, knowing that though the battle had been won, the war for justice, recognition, and survival was ongoing. But she was ready. She had found her voice, and nothing could silence it again. Lucia's flight back to the United States was quieter than her journey to Beijing, but no less intense. The city lights below twinkled like tiny constellations, yet she saw no beauty in them, only the miles that separated her from her mother, from the apartment that still hung in limbo, from the life she was desperate to reclaim. Her mind raced with strategies, contingencies, and potential confrontations. Reeves had fulfilled his promise in Beijing, compensating her with the agreed daily salary, but Lucia knew the victory was far from complete. Willis remained a dangerous obstacle, a man willing to take credit for her work, twist narratives, and manipulate authority. She understood that in corporate battles, recognition alone was never enough. One had to secure power, protect allies, and control information. Back in New York, the city's chaos welcomed her. Honking cars, the chatter of office workers, and the clatter of construction formed a backdrop to her growing anxiety. She hailed a cab to their apartment, clutching the check and the jade pen, her father's legacy, the object that had guided her through every crisis. Her mother's face lit up when she saw her. Relief, worry, exhaustion, all tangled into one. "We have enough for the deposit and your medication," Lucia said, handing over the check. Min's hands trembled as she accepted it. "You saved us, Lucia." "No," Lucia whispered, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "We saved ourselves. This isn't over, Mom." "Not yet." Her words rang with truth. Reeves' daily salary had bought time, not freedom. Willis's presence at the company remained, and if he regained control over narrative and perception, her hard work could be erased, diminished, or appropriated. She needed a plan. The next morning, she arrived at Reeves Enterprises earlier than usual, her cleaning uniform replaced with a sharply tailored suit borrowed from a friend. She no longer needed to hide her presence. The game had shifted. Security cameras tracked her movements, but now she had authority and legitimacy backing her actions. Willis was already in the conference room when she arrived, reviewing spreadsheets. His smirk faltered as he saw her enter, not as the timid cleaner, but as a professional prepared for confrontation. "Morning," he said, forcing casualness, but his eyes betrayed tension. "Good morning," Lucia replied evenly. "We need to review the Huang Tech translations, Willis. There are discrepancies that could affect compliance, financial projections, and worker safety." He raised an eyebrow. "I thought the contract was finalized in Beijing." "Not entirely," she said. "There were annotations and clarifications necessary to prevent misinterpretation. I've documented them in detail, and I want the board to review them today." Willis's jaw tightened. He realized she had retained power by controlling critical information. For the first time, he seemed unsure, cautious. Later that morning, the emergency board meeting convened. Reeves presided, his expression unreadable. Lucia handed over her complete set of translations and annotations. As the board reviewed her notes, murmurs spread. The discrepancies she had highlighted, misstated technical specifications, misinterpreted workforce provisions, and financial miscalculations, were glaringly obvious. The Huang tech representatives had already confirmed their accuracy, further undermining Willis's credibility. Reeves leaned back in his chair, studying Lucia. "You've done remarkable work," he said, his voice carrying weight. "Your attention to detail, your expertise, and your integrity have preserved this deal and protected countless stakeholders." Willis's face reddened. His attempts to manipulate perception and claim credit were failing spectacularly. He opened his mouth to protest, but the board silenced him with a sharp glance. His influence waned as Lucia presented the final document, clearly articulating each risk and recommendation. By mid-afternoon, the outcome was undeniable. Reeves Enterprises would implement the deal under the terms Lucia verified, ensuring compliance, workforce protections, and operational integrity. Willis was removed from the project, reassigned to a position with no strategic authority. For Lucia, it was a monumental victory, but the personal triumph was equally significant. She had stepped from the shadows, claimed her rightful place, and preserved her family's stability. The jade pen, once a symbol of memory and hidden talent, now represented agency, courage, and the power of knowledge applied with precision. As she left the boardroom, she felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The sun streamed through the building's windows, illuminating the city below. In the distance, she could see her mother waiting, hope in her eyes. Lucia knew the battles ahead: corporate intrigue, social prejudices, and systemic obstacles. But she had proven she could navigate them. She had discovered that courage, intellect, and persistence could transform invisibility into recognition, fear into action, and secrecy into power. Stepping out into the bustling streets, she allowed herself a quiet smile. For the first time in years, the world could see her. Not just a cleaner, not just a daughter, but a force capable of reshaping destinies. And she would not be invisible again. The streets of New York seemed to pulse with life as Lucia walked briskly toward the office, her heels clicking against the pavement in a rhythm that mirrored her heartbeat. Each step reminded her of how far she had come, from hiding behind cleaning carts and anonymous usernames to commanding attention in boardrooms and making decisions that affected thousands. She entered Reeves Enterprises through the main lobby for the first time without a uniform, her ID granting her legitimate access to restricted floors. The receptionist, accustomed to seeing her in housekeeping attire, blinked in surprise. "Miss Vega?" she asked, uncertain. "Yes," Lucia replied with a calm smile. "I'll be attending the executive briefing today." Her confidence startled everyone, from junior staff to security guards, who now treated her with a respect previously reserved for managers. The subtle shift in perception was empowering, but Lucia knew this was only the beginning. Knowledge without influence was still fragile, and she had to cement her position. In the elevator, she reviewed her notes. Willis had been removed from the Huang Tech project, but his allies were still entrenched in the company hierarchy. Some had benefited from his manipulations. Others remained skeptical of a cleaning staff member asserting authority. She needed allies. Her first stop was the legal department. She had meticulously documented every misstep in translation, every attempt by Willis to distort facts, and every potential legal liability for Reeves Enterprises. The attorneys were initially skeptical. After all, she wasn't formally employed in a role that carried authority, but the clarity and precision of her notes left no room for doubt. "Miss Vega," one of the senior counsel said, adjusting her glasses, "this is impeccable work. Whoever prepared this must have extensive experience with both Mandarin business contracts and corporate compliance." "I did," Lucia said simply, meeting their eyes. "I also understand the workforce implications and financial exposure. The board needs this corrected immediately." Her voice carried a quiet authority, and the lawyers nodded, already impressed. She had transformed from the invisible cleaner into a credible, essential consultant. Her knowledge demanded recognition. By the time she reached the boardroom, Reeves had assembled the executives for a follow-up session. The tension was palpable. Some whispered about her sudden presence. Others glared with suspicion. Willis, seated in the corner, avoided eye contact, his usual smirk replaced with a tight-lipped tension. Reeves motioned for silence. "We are here to review the final translation of the Huang Tech proposal. Miss Vega has prepared detailed annotations correcting previous errors. Let's begin." Lucia stepped forward and laid out her documents on the table. Every section had been cross-referenced, verified, and clarified. Technical terms, financial figures, workforce projections, all meticulously aligned with the original Mandarin text. She guided the board through critical points, highlighting both opportunities and risks. Her presentation was calm, precise, and authoritative. No one interrupted, not even Willis. By the time she concluded, murmurs of approval and nods of agreement had spread across the room. Reeves leaned back, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, acknowledging both her competence and the subtle power she now wielded. "Miss Vega," he said finally, "you've not only saved this deal, but protected the company from significant legal and financial exposure. We will ensure your contributions are formally recognized and compensated." Lucia allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She had crossed the threshold from invisibility to visibility. Her father's legacy, her own intelligence, and years of perseverance had coalesced into this moment. She knew this was only the beginning of a larger journey, one where her skills could challenge injustices, protect her family, and influence corporate decisions at the highest levels. Leaving the boardroom, she felt the weight of responsibility settle comfortably on her shoulders. Reeves and the board had acknowledged her ability, but now it was up to her to navigate office politics, protect her mother, and ensure her newfound influence translated into lasting security. Outside, the city hummed with energy. She inhaled deeply, savoring the cold December air. The battle for recognition had been won, but the war for true independence, justice, and impact had just begun. And for the first time in her life, Lucia Vega was ready to lead it. Fully visible, fully empowered, and fully determined. The following morning, Lucia arrived earlier than usual, carrying her own meticulously prepared briefcase instead of a cleaning cart. The security guard raised an eyebrow but nodded when he saw her ID. She was no longer just an observer. She had full access and she intended to use it. The elevator ride felt endless. Every floor passed was a reminder of how far she had come and how much was still at stake. She could feel the tension in the building. Whispers among the staff, furtive glances from executives, and an unmistakable undercurrent of fear from those who had benefited from Willis's manipulations. The boardroom was already filling with executives. Reeves sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable, but his eyes betrayed curiosity. Willis lingered at his side, his smirk gone, replaced with a sharp, calculating glare. Today they would test her resolve and her influence. Reeves opened the session. "Miss Vega has provided the final translation and analysis of the Huang Tech proposal. We will review it in detail. Any questions will be addressed after her presentation." Lucia stepped forward, placing her annotated documents neatly on the table. She began with a calm, confident tone. "I've reviewed the entire contract line by line. The sections previously misrepresented are now corrected. Key points regarding workforce management, technical specifications, and financial obligations have been verified with the original text." Whispers spread across the room. Some executives exchanged shocked looks, realizing that a cleaning staff member had performed a task they had struggled with for days. Willis clenched his jaw, clearly uncomfortable. She continued, highlighting the critical errors that could have led to massive layoffs, legal violations, and financial loss. "Section 16, paragraph 4, she said, pointing to her notes, "does not mandate the termination of 300 positions. It outlines recommendations for optional staff optimization, with provisions for retraining and reassignment. Misinterpretation of this could have triggered contractual disputes and regulatory scrutiny." The room fell silent. Reeves leaned forward, studying her with a measured intensity. "You are certain about this?" "Yes," Lucia replied firmly. "I have verified the Mandarin text, consulted industry terminology, and cross-referenced each clause against labor regulations and company policy. The corrected translation reflects the original intent without jeopardizing employees or exposing the previous misinterpretation could have caused harm. My goal is to protect both the company and its employees. Misattributing work or making errors in translation is not just a procedural mistake. It has real-world consequences. The board members murmured in agreement, visibly impressed by her clarity, composure, and authority. Reeves finally spoke. Miss Vega, your contribution here is extraordinary. Not only have you preserved this deal, but you have safeguarded the integrity of the company and our workforce. Your actions demonstrate both skill and courage. Lucia felt a surge of relief, but she knew this wasn't just about recognition. It was about securing her and her mother's future. I appreciate your acknowledgement, Mr. Reeves. I would like to formalize my role, including protections for my mother's immigration status and guaranteed employment. My work should not put her at risk. Reeves nodded. Consider it done. We will draft a contract immediately. Willis, humiliated and cornered, stood silently. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Lucia had transformed from invisible maid to indispensable authority. Her father's legacy fully realized through her expertise and courage. As the session concluded, Reeves shook her hand firmly, a rare gesture of respect from a man known for his guarded demeanor. From now on, Miss Vega, you will have the resources you need to continue ensuring our operations are precise, compliant, and successful. Your salary will reflect the critical importance of your role. Lucia smiled, feeling the weight of her journey lift slightly. For the first time, her family could breathe easier. Her mother's medical care was secured, and their housing was stabilized. But more than that, Lucia had claimed her rightful place in a world that had long overlooked her. A place where her intelligence, dedication, and integrity could finally shine. Stepping out of the boardroom, she glanced at the city skyline. The lights of New York glimmered like possibilities waiting to be seized. She was no longer invisible. She was a force to be reckoned with, and the story was far from over. Lucia returned home that evening, the city's glow casting long shadows across her small apartment. The space felt different now, not just because of the warm hum of the lights and the faint smell of her mother's medicine, but because she herself had changed. The invisible girl who had moved silently through Reeves' enterprises was gone. In her place stood someone who could demand respect, assert authority, and protect those she loved. Her mother, Min, was awake, sitting on the couch wrapped in a thin blanket. Her eyes widened as Lucia entered, not just from surprise, but from the unspoken understanding that their lives had taken a dramatic turn. "They recognized you?" Min whispered, clutching her daughter's hand. "Yes, Mama," Lucia replied softly, tears threatening to spill. "And everything will be okay. No one can take us from this home now. We're safe." For the first time in years, Min smiled without reservation, the weight of months of stress lifting slightly. "You've always been strong," she said. "Stronger than I realized. I always knew it, but seeing it, you amaze me." Lucia sank into the chair beside her mother, the jade pen resting heavily in her palm. It wasn't just a tool anymore. It was a symbol of her heritage, her father's love, and the future she could now claim. The next few days were a whirlwind. Reeves personally oversaw the drafting of a contract guaranteeing her position and salary, including the confidentiality clause protecting her mother's immigration status. He allocated a small team of experts to assist her, giving her access to resources she had only dreamed of before. Lucia's days, once filled with scrubbing floors and translating in secret, were now devoted entirely to meaningful work, ensuring that technical translations were flawless, providing cultural and linguistic insights for international negotiations, and mentoring junior staff who often struggled with cross-cultural communication. She had found her Lucia smiled, feeling the weight of the past years lift. We kept ourselves safe, Mama. Together, in the weeks that followed, life stabilized. Reeves, impressed by her skill and integrity, promoted her to a position that allowed her to oversee international translations and cross-cultural negotiations. She trained a small, diverse team of junior translators, giving opportunities to people who had been overlooked just as she once had been. Her father's jade pen remained at her side, a constant reminder of where she came from and the legacy she carried forward. She began mentoring other young women, especially those from marginalized backgrounds, showing them that talent and perseverance could break barriers no one thought they could. The final months brought quiet triumphs. Her mother's health improved steadily, the family moved into a comfortable apartment, and Lucia's influence within Reeves Enterprises continued to grow. She was no longer invisible, no longer merely surviving. She had become a force, respected, skilled, and unafraid. One evening, as she stood by the window of her new home, looking out at the city lights, she reflected on the journey. Every obstacle, every moment of fear and doubt had led her here. She had faced betrayal, corporate greed, and personal loss, and had emerged not only unbroken but stronger than ever. Lucia Vega had claimed her voice, her power, and her place in the world. She had turned invisibility into influence, secrecy into authority, and struggle into triumph. And as the city hummed below, she knew this was only the beginning. For the first time in her life, she smiled freely, knowing the story of survival had transformed into a story of victory. Lucia's first day in her new role felt surreal. The offices she once polished and swept now became her domain, a space where her decisions influenced the course of billion-dollar deals. She moved through the hallways with quiet confidence, greeting colleagues who once ignored her, some awkwardly, others with newfound respect. But the real work was not in being seen, it was in being heard. Every translation, every briefing, every strategic recommendation carried weight. Reeves, once a figure of intimidating authority, now consulted her regularly. He still had the sharp edges of a businessman, but the predatory sneer had softened into a calculating respect. He listened when she spoke, weighing her insights with a seriousness reserved for people who could change the outcome of high-stakes deals. Lucia realized that power in the corporate world wasn't just about money. It was about knowledge, timing, and courage. Even Willis, humbled by the exposure of his manipulations, approached her with a tentative professionalism. He offered a quiet apology, which she accepted without bitterness. The years of dismissal and prejudice had taught her that resentment would only weigh her down. Strategic forgiveness was a form of strength. Her mother, Min, finally experienced life without constant fear. Medical bills were no longer a crushing burden, and she could rest knowing that Lucia's skill and determination had secured them stability. Lucia would often find her mother in the evenings, quietly knitting or reading, smiling without the shadow of despair. It was a luxury they had not known in years. Lucia, however, never forgot the invisible lessons of her past. She began a mentorship program within Reeves Enterprises, creating a pipeline for young translators and multilingual talent who came from underprivileged backgrounds. She ensured that opportunities were not just about credentials or status, they were about skill, potential, and drive. She saw in them the ghosts of her own youth, hidden, underestimated, and waiting for a chance. Late nights still found her at the office, revisiting complex documents, improving internal systems, or coaching her team. Yet, there was a difference now. The work was meaningful, and the weight of survival had transformed into purpose. Months later, a major acquisition required careful negotiation with a European consortium. Reeves delegated the responsibility to Lucia, trusting her not just with translation, but with cultural nuances, legal intricacies, and diplomatic subtleties. She navigated the discussions with a grace that belied her age, balancing technical precision with human understanding. By the time the deal concluded, she had not only secured the terms, but had strengthened relationships across continents, a feat that no machine, algorithm, or inexperienced executive could have achieved. And yet, even in success, she remembered the fragility of her journey. She kept the jade translator's pen close, running her fingers over its smooth surface as a reminder of her father's teachings, the sacrifices her mother made, and the years of invisible labor that brought her here. It was both talisman and compass, grounding her in the principles that guided her life: knowledge, integrity, and courage. At night, she would sometimes stand by the window, looking out over the city. The skyline shimmered with lights that once felt out of reach, symbols of wealth and opportunity she had once only cleaned around. But now, she belonged to this world in her own right, not as a bystander, but as a participant and a creator of possibilities. The story of Lucia Vega became one of legend within the company. The cleaner who became the translator who saved a company from legal disaster and ethical compromise. But for Lucia, the true victory was quieter. The security of her family, the affirmation of her own talent, and the transformation of her struggle into empowerment. She had navigated invisibility, prejudice, and desperation. She had claimed her space in a world that underestimated her. And as she prepared for the next challenge, she knew that whatever came, she would meet it with the same courage, intelligence, and grace that had carried her from shadows into the light. Lucia Vega had rewritten her destiny, proving that the sharpest mind and the strongest heart could triumph over any obstacle. And as the city hummed below, her future stretched out like a vast horizon, full of promise, challenge, and undeniable potential. The moment Reeves signed the contract, Lucia felt a weight lift from her chest. The room had been tense, filled with executives and whispered speculations. But for her, time seemed to freeze. Reeves leaned back, a rare look of admiration crossing his face. "Well done, Miss Vega. Truly remarkable." Lucia didn't just smile. She exhaled years of fear, exhaustion, and invisible labor. The check for her work, a full day of the CEO's salary, $27,400, was only the beginning. Reeves, impressed beyond measure, insisted the company formally recognize her contributions. Legal drafted a contract to transfer the full $250,000 she had earned for completing the translation flawlessly. Not a penny withheld, not a single clause to diminish her payment. For the first time in her life, Lucia held real, undeniable financial power in her hands. She stared at the sum, the numbers impossibly large, yet real, shimmering like a promise. The eviction notices that had haunted her family became irrelevant. Her mother's hospital bills were instantly cleared. For Min, there were tears, laughter, and relief that had seemed impossible for years. But the money was more than survival. It was freedom. Lucia invested wisely, guided by the knowledge and discipline she had learned during her years of scrappy online translations. She bought a modest apartment for herself and her mother in a better part of the city. But she didn't stop there. She launched a boutique translation and consulting firm, capitalizing on her rare combination of business fluency, technical expertise, and multilingual skill. Lucia Vega, once invisible, became a symbol of brilliance and resilience. The media caught wind of her story. The black cleaning lady turned corporate savant who saved $1 billion deal. Offers flooded in, partnerships, book deals, even speaking engagements. Opportunities she had never dreamed of. But she remained grounded, remembering the years she'd spent in obscurity, polishing offices while absorbing knowledge others overlooked. Her first hire? Other talented individuals from backgrounds like hers. Overlooked, underestimated, invisible workers whose potential had been ignored. Lucia ensured they were paid well, given recognition, and mentored to thrive. Her success became a bridge transforming lives, not just her own. Late at night, in her own apartment now filled with warmth and sunlight instead of eviction notices, Lucia would sometimes touch the jade translator's pen. It felt lighter, not because it had lost its weight, but because she had finally lifted the burdens it had symbolized for so long. She had translated more than documents. She had translated her life from struggle to triumph. In the end, Lucia didn't just escape poverty. She reshaped it into opportunity. The black cleaning lady who had once gone unseen was now a wealthy, powerful, and respected force in the corporate world. And the irony, the beautiful, satisfying irony, was this. The The very company that had once discarded her family now owed its most critical success to her, and she had been paid handsomely for it. Lucia Vega had won, not by luck, not by bending to power, but by claiming her genius when no one expected her to. And as she looked out over the city from her penthouse window, the skyline glittering like a promise, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would never be invisible again.